Welcome, Wargamers, to the dark and hostile forests of the mortal realms, because today we're talking about the Sylvaneth and what they've been up to lately. Now, for those of you who are new to Age of Sigmar, or this faction specifically, the Sylvaneth are the children of Alariel, the goddess of life, and the realm Ghyran. They were created long ago in the Age of Myth when Alariel planted the first grove, and from there her children have blossomed, pun intended, into a setting-wide race that constantly seeks to protect and defend the natural beauty of the realms. Specifically, its thick forests which act as the home for innumerable species in vast ecosystems. And while it's easy to dismiss them as like, oh, these are just the tree people, right? The hippie faction, if you will, and think little of their depth, there's actually a lot going on under the hood, because the Sylvaneth, in my mind, represent some force fighting to protect the setting itself, rather than subjugating it like chaos or taming it like order. In fact, many major plot points in the kind of grand, bigger Age of Sigmar narrative have revolved around the Sylvaneth, or at least included them, because the ideas of life magic and nature and the connection between all of these things, the heroes and their environment and the world that we're fighting for versus the heroes fighting, is massive. They've been involved with realm route gateways that allow for quick travel, healing life magics that restore troops, and vicious defenders of the woods that make certain areas impassable. And that actually shows up in a few different battle tomes, that there are just some areas where forces don't want to go to because they understand if we walk through this forest, there's going to be a Sylvaneth ambush and we're not going to be prepared. And that's kind of a hard note to hit, because they're not a passive army. They're not the hippies that just stay in the woods. They fight brutally with guerrilla-style warfare. Small ambush raids, they try to pull the enemy apart and strike fast so that they don't have time to react. And if you want to see some awesome Sylvaneth dialogue to get a sense of what they're kind of like, I really do recommend the book Black Talon First Mark. It's a Black Library novel, and there's a wonderful moment where you see just how alien and uncaring this Sylvaneth can be. That these aren't just hippies out in the woods trying, to garden everything they see. They are the other, an inhuman race that views everything from life and death to magic, the natural order, and even the idea of the self in wildly different ways from us. Now, in this video, I wanted to talk about the Sylvaneth specifically because honestly, we haven't heard a ton from them in a bit. They got a new book a while back, but not a lot of stories included them recently until Broken Realms Kragnos. And this book put them and Alariel, in my opinion, back in the spotlight as movers and shakers of the setting. And so I wanted to recap their involvement in Broken Realms, as well as just kind of talk about what I'm excited to see in the future. So if you haven't read Broken Realms Kragnos, I did a huge series on it. It's a really fun book. I can put the link in the description down below. But the part concerning the Sylvaneth really only takes place in the prologue. You see, for the last year or two, Nagash, the god of undeath, has reigned supreme. The entirety of the realms was steeped in death magic, and Ghyran was no exception. But after his defeat by the hands of Teclis and the folks at Settlers' Gain, it relented a bit. Alariel, goddess of life, seized the opportunity to kind of set the tone for the next age. She took a large contingent of Sylvaneth and attacked the chaos forces surrounding an object called the Oak of Ages Past, which is a incomprehensibly large tree that flew out from the old world. Now, stationed at this, giant artifact for what it is, Nurgle forces had taken it over, and also the bulk of Ghyran in general during the Age of Chaos. They set up shop here and built a really crude fortress. I mean, I think fortress is even a strong word based on the description that we got. There's lots of beastmen roaming around the woods. It was just kind of a dangerous place full of chaos nastiness, but it wasn't like iron walls and all this kinds of stuff. Well, Alariel wants to seize the power gap after Nagash's fall, and the Oak of Ages Past is a part of that. So she takes this huge army of Sylvaneth and launches a full-on assault, and the battle that's depicted is really quite brutal. Beastmen are caught by surprise, dryads and tree revenants go absolutely nuts, they're like hacking and slashing, but it was not totally one-sided. The Beastmen had rebuilt their dirge horn, an instrument that when played projects a sense of despair, to the point where entire armies will just stop and fall and weep. Like, it's just this incredibly soul-crushing psychological weapon rather than like a gun or an arrow or something like that. Luckily, Alarielle was able to cut this down and really just begin her ritual. And it's important to stress that as this battle is going on, the Sylvaneth, of course, are dying and taking casualties, but more than that, they're being sacrificed. You see, as the souls of these creatures fall to the ground, it begins to seep into the earth, and between Alarielle infusing her own life magic and the sacrifices of what I think were dozens of Sylvaneth, the Oak of Ages Past became alive once more. And this is actually a really large deal because the Sylvaneth, as a people, are meant to be cyclical in their lives. They live, when they die, they drop a seed, it can be replanted, and they live again. And so that cycle is part of their life, their worldview, their understanding, but this sacrifice, the ones who died here and went into the Oak of Ages Past, broke that cycle. It was the true death. And when it's completed, the Beastmen are fully driven from the area, and a new unit is born from the tree, the War Song Revenant. And finally, the Lifequake, as we're calling it, spreads out. The time of Nagash being ascendant is over, and where death's grip is loosened, life flourishes. And that's what happened here. Just as a tide of amethyst magic covered the realms during the Soul Wars, life magic washed over it now. And what's actually interesting is that way before Broken Realms Kragnos came out, this event was sort of, I would say, foreshadowed in their battle tome under the entry of Let War Reign, and I'll read that for you right now. From atop the new growth that sprouts from the ruined remains of the Oak of Ages Past, Alarielle calls every glade to launch an all-out offensive. She demands that wargroves march out to reclaim every lost site of power, targeting first the great falls of the Virgilian Forest, the living mont of the Lamenter Peaks, the ruined Tower of Vines in Verdia, and the floating gardens of Humidia. All across Gioran, the spirit song pulses like never before as the seasons of war accelerate, rising towards its crescendo. That is the last little story snippet in their battle tome, and it's rad. Now, as to what this spell did, the immediate effects that we understand is that it finally loosened the chains enough for Kragnos to break free, and he basically, at that point, kicked in the events of Broken Realms Kragnos. But there's more going on, and I'm excited to see the full implications of it. We know that life magic went everywhere, and it's also being magnified by the Warsong Revenants. No place was as affected as much as Gur, which is a realm teeming with life in an endless food chain. And while Kragnos was certainly the most obvious result of this ritual, it's the other more subtle things that I find interesting. Animals on the rise in every realm. Forest and Chamon expanding and bringing their razor wire branches into cities. Water springs and Akshi bursting with life, and things like that. And so I want to end this video, like I end all of mine, just by talking about why I think this is so cool. And I'm going to be honest, I wanted to talk about the Sylvaneth simply because I hadn't talked about them in so long. It's a faction that I really like the lore behind and the concept of, but they don't always, they haven't been big movers and shakers for a while. But putting that little intro into Broken Realms Kragnos was big to me. I like the idea that life magic was the direct response to Nagash's death magic. And the next chapter seems to be set in Gur, which means they could have easily had, a MacGuffin that focused on that, but Alarielle was allowed to take the reins. After 2 years of all that artwork being dark and dour with all the death-themed things, it makes me happy to think that we'll see, impressive fantasy art that's colorful and vibrant again, matching the themes of the magic that are actively affecting the realms. Now, of course, there were all kinds of cryptic warnings and messages between Alarielle and Teclis, and we don't have the clearest picture of them at the moment, but this was a big step forward in my opinion, and life favors the aggressor, so good on Alarielle. Now, as far as what this could mean, this new resurgence of life in the future, I mean, just off the top of my head, some stuff I'd like to see more Sylvaneth units, maybe some more animals. Like I know they have that, Alariel herself has that super cool beetle that's like turning into 1,000 little bugs that come together. Give me more of that. Give me a rhino or something of like that. I'd love to see the Oak of Ages Past as part of a more story-driving location than we've seen before. I mean, when I say story-driving, I just mean it referenced more. Like we talk about the Anvil of Apotheosis for the Stormcast, that comes up quite a bit, like in other factions and that kind of thing. I would love for the Sylvaneth to have something like that. Or just a location where we see more of Alariel. In the book Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds, we see Sigmar talking to people at the Anvil, and I would love to have that same experience for Alariel at the Oak of Ages Past. Really, I just want to hang out with them more, right? I mean, it just seems like such a cool faction. They're so different in their worldview and everything that I would just want to hang out with them more and get a sense of what they're like. So I'll open that up to you. How about you guys? What would you like to see for the Sylvaneth from a story perspective first? And then we can talk rules and stuff like that later. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you next time in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Happy wargaming.